Hi, I'm John Moran, and I'm a PhD candidate at Stanford University in cultural anthropology. For now, my ethnographic dissertation project is called Other Florida Sacred Earth, Citizen Naturalists of the Scott Era. And as a part of that research, I've been collecting oral histories for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program in a collection called Naturalists of the Big Bend. Yeah, the oral history collection so far has over 30 interviews. I first became interested in oral history when I was an intern for the Sam Proctor Oral History Program here at UF when I was an undergrad. I graduated in 2012. So I did a lot of transcribing and also conducted an interview on my own. And that was sort of the seed of my interest. So when I came back to Florida to work on the dissertation, I thought it would be great. I'm going to be talking with people. Let's have those interviews become an archive. People have been very interested, generous, and accessible with my inquiries. Will you sit down and do an oral history program? A lot of people have said they've been honored. So a lot of the difficulties, I think, have come on my end, which is figuring out what will be the scope and focus of the collection and how will it be narrowed. Because there are a lot of people interested in environmental issues in Florida. And so the topic can sort of balloon and balloon if you don't think about that. Some of the first organizations that I was involved with when I began my dissertation research were the Apalachicola Riverkeeper. I participated in the Apalachicola River Trek, which is a 5-day kayak camping fundraiser where we paddled the length of the Apalachicola to raise awareness and over $40,000. So that was one group that I started doing interviews with. I began to interview the people that I participated with on that trip. And then from there it snowballed. And the same with the Florida Master Naturalist Program, which is based in IFAS here at UF. And through the Leon County IFAS Extension Office, I took Master Naturalist courses. And then I interviewed the teachers of the Master Naturalist course. And I also began to interview the other students in those courses. And then finally, I've worked with the Gulf Specimen Marine Lab and also with the Wet Net Mullet Fishing Society, both in Wakulla County. And those were also springboards to start finding folks to interview. When you interview naturalists, you sometimes end up interviewing folks in a swamp or, outside by a lake. So I have done one interview that was a hike, and one of my interlocutors wanted to do an interview on a kayak trip. I thought that might be a little bit difficult to kayak and hold my equipment at the same time. So that's a challenge interviewing environmentally minded folks, is the environment. I guess, another challenge has been, some people don't want to get too political in the interviews because of their, professional position, for example. And so that's always a challenge to navigate. It almost tends to be that, like, the next interview or 2 interviews that I'll schedule are someone that I only heard about maybe a week or 2 before. And so I'm sort of constantly living on the front edge of the wave in that sense, that someone tells me, someone I just interviewed gets me interested in a particular topic, and then I move to another interview that's related. So that's happened a lot with scientists. For example, I interviewed Skip Livingston, who's an aquatic biologist who's worked on the Apalachicola River. And from that interview forward, I've been more and more interested with interviewing other scientists. Or when I interviewed Jim Stevenson, who used to work for the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, which is now DEP. That got me more interested in DEP and in the bureaucratic side, and so then I moved in that direction. And several of the early interviews, the element of spirituality came up, sort of New Age spirituality, Buddhism, Unitarian Universalism. So that's another sort of unexpected topic that I've continued to bring up. Oral history, you get a revelation. It doesn't mean that it's true, because oral histories are full of subjectivity and they're all about belief and anecdote and opinion. So one thing that has surprised me is trying to figure out with the Apalachicola River and Bay, the different sources that have caused the troubles of the bay, the fishery collapse there. And for example, when I interviewed Skip Livingston, he really brings climate change to the forefront as one of the driving problems of that. So that's been interesting and sort of surprising to think about. And it's also interesting to be working on interviews for that topic while it's headed before the Supreme Court, because people are always jittery, will they be subpoenaed or something, and how will these records be used? So that's interesting. In terms of most interesting stories, oftentimes I meet at someone's house or a coffee shop, so there haven't been any alligator attacks or something. One interview with Leslie Cox was a tour of Tates Hell, and we spent almost 3 hours out in Tates Hell with our boots on, walking around, and as Leslie joked, her interview was interesting, but even more interesting was all the sounds that we captured of insects and birds out in Tates Hell. So that was sort of fun. Thanks for getting the walking stick.
Yes. Yeah.
They're the snake prod sticks,
Yeah.
right?
If we chase anything away, we might need to.
One thing I've noticed is that there's a lot of people that I interview, the naturalists, environmental activists, have a Presbyterian background. And I have been trying to figure out what is up with that. And there are a couple of different little theories, but I don't know if that's interesting, but from an academic perspective, it's been puzzling me. Whether it's just a sign of, upper middle class white folks who have the sort of time and money to care about the environment, or if it's something about Calvinism, or if they're all from New Jersey, which is a big seat of Presbyterianism, and there's so much pollution there when they were growing up as baby boomers. But yeah, my interviews are definitely not driven by a careful, concerted research question. If anything, they're driven by topics, and also just by the sort of natural creative process of moving forward and finding more folks. But I would say there's two main goals with the Oral History Project for me. And one is working on identity in the region. I think in Florida, we have a problem, as I read this somewhere recently, I can't remember who I'm quoting. Florida is a space, but it's not a place. It's a state, but there isn't a strong state identity necessarily. Our state is very vibrant because so many people move here from so many different places all around the world and all around the United States. But sometimes when people retire here, for example, or they come here because we don't have an income tax and they want to harbor their wealth, they're not invested in our schools, they're not invested in our parks, and they never almost really become citizens. They never become Floridians. Maybe they're always from New Jersey or something. You meet someone who's been in Florida for 25 years, and that is the equivalent of like being a fifth-generation Floridian sometimes. Your roots are really deep. I'm trying through the project to encourage people to think about their local identity and the connections that they have to this place because, there's a lot of criticism of that. It could be a problem. Maybe it's nativism, it's exclusionary, it could even be charged that it's racist. But I think at the end of the day, it helps with civic engagement. And one of the big topics where we can have an identity as Floridians is around the environment, because we really have a globally exceptional set of ecologies here. They're very fragile and threatened, but they're also a thing that pulls us all together. And so I want to encourage that identity. And the Tallahassee region is a great region to do that for a variety of reasons, because of the high educational attainment in the city, because of the 3 universities and the state government, and because there's so many public lands there. And then the second goal is just really a baseline archive. We don't have a lot of interviews of environmentalists in Florida, even though it's a very important topic. And there are not as many interviews as I would like about Tallahassee in that particular region of the state. Some work has been done on the oystermen in Apalachicola, for example, and some on civil rights in Tallahassee. But we could have so much more. And so I personally think that every extra oral history interview we have is a contribution. The collection is still being built. I think there's some great interviews with Susan Cerulean, the nature writer, who I hope will be remembered. Her works will be remembered, and so I think that's useful perhaps for someone in an academic sense one day. And same with, Gulf Specimen, and with Jim Stevenson at DEP. So I think it could be useful for people who want to write about changes in environmental regulation during this period in Florida, especially under the Scott administration. I think it could be useful for anyone who's interested in nature writing or the environmental humanities. And then it also has a focus on Tallahassee in a general sense, on Wakulla Springs, and on the Apalachicola River and Bay. So I think any of those topics could bring someone into the collection. I've tried to get people to talk about religion, for example, as it relates to caring about the environment. That's such an important and necessary academic focus. But there are also all these topics that get occluded, and sometimes I'm too shy to really ask people even basic facts like, do you believe in God? What's your religion? Or, are you registered with particular political party, because, you know, in the U.S. we're sort of taught that maybe that's impolite to ask, even when I'm asking people these really intimate questions about their whole life. So that's maybe a regret I have, and something I would encourage in the future, you know, to think about those topics that are a little taboo but are so relevant. And the second thing is, I'm just very grateful for all the people who've let me sit down and talk with them, and for the program. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been definitely, at least pedagogically, transformative and edifying for me. And that's the way it is, folks. Well, thank you so much, Leslie. This has it's been a real pleasure as always.
It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Hopefully you got some useful information.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah? That's awesome.